It was an ordinary early morning. Soft sunlight streamed through the thick glass windows of Denver International Airport, bathing the cold plastic chairs and polished gray stone floors in a muted gold. Tasha Holloway, 16 years old, stood still amidst the rush of travelers. In her hands she clutched a navy blue backpack, worn but clean, hugging it to her chest like an invisible shield. Today was a big day. Her very first solo flight. No parents, no relatives accompanying her. But it was also a very special trip, a reward from her godmother, a first-class ticket in honor of Tasha's outstanding performance in the statewide science competition. The ticket, that precious honorable ticket, was tucked safely in the pocket of her gray hoodie. Every step she took toward the boarding gate made her heart pound faster, but she wasn't nervous, not at all. She had checked the ticket 3 times. She had read the instructions carefully. She had prepared everything. All she had to do was find seat 3B and quietly enjoy the flight. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 737 gleamed under cool white lights. Leather seats in soft caramel tones, wide and inviting. A faint scent of cedar wood lingered in the air, blending with the gentle hum of classical music. Everything was arranged to perfection, like a room reserved for those deemed worthy. Tasha stepped in, her eyes reflecting a mix of hesitation and pride. She quietly found row 3, the window seat, and sat down. Her backpack nestled tightly in her lap, headphones loosely draped around her neck, fingers brushing over a book she hadn't yet opened. She wasn't drawing attention. She didn't want to. She was simply existing, quietly, like a whisper. Other passengers began to board. A man in a dark suit, his face pinched in a scowl, muttered into his phone as he passed. An elderly woman with a string of pearls around her neck carefully placed her handbag into the overhead bin. No one paid attention to Tasha. No one asked any questions, and she was grateful for that. The sharp click of high heels against carpet snapped Tasha out of her thoughts. A flight attendant, a middle-aged woman with a stern, tight expression, strode toward her. Her uniform was immaculate, the name tag gleaming on her chest, Ms. Parker. Instinctively, Tasha looked up and offered a polite smile, but the smile was not returned. Ms. Parker stopped right beside seat 3B, her gaze sweeping coldly over Tasha before tightening into a frown, as if she had just discovered something out of place. "You're in the wrong seat," she said, not loudly, but just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Her tone was cold, slicing like a small, sharp blade. Tasha blinked, momentarily confused. I think this is my seat," she said softly, reaching into her hoodie pocket and pulling out her boarding pass. Ms. Parker gave the ticket a cursory glance, her scowl deepening. "This is first class," she emphasized, her eyes scanning Tasha's young face as if searching for signs of deceit. "I know," Tasha said. "My ticket says 3B. Without bothering to double-check, Ms. Parker crossed her arms, her voice growing harsher. "You need to gather your things and move back to economy. Don't hold up the boarding process." Around them, eyes began to drift over. Some passengers glanced quickly away, pretending not to notice. Others stared, as if watching a minor sideshow before takeoff. No one stood up. No one asked a question. Tasha felt her cheeks burn. She wanted to explain. She wanted to plead. But deep down she knew. She had been judged not by her actions, but by her appearance. Not because she had done anything wrong, simply because of who she was. Lowering her head, she quietly hugged her backpack and stepped down the long aisle, like a voiceless defendant walking away from the stand. The economy seats were tighter, more cramped. Gone was the scent of cedarwood. Gone were the polished, polite smiles. Tasha sank into a window seat, clutching the straps of her backpack tightly. her eyes fixed outside where luggage carts rolled sluggishly across the wide airport grounds. Inside her chest, a slow aching burn rose. She had done everything right, wore neat clothes, held a valid ticket, been polite, been invisible. And yet... Without thinking, Tasha pulled her phone from her pocket, opened her messages, and typed. She kicked me out of my seat. Said, I didn't belong. I'm sitting in economy now. Simple words. She sent the message to Evelyn, the only person she knew would understand. Then she quietly placed the phone on her lap again, her eyes heavy with sadness, while the world around her continued buzzing along as if nothing had ever happened. Her phone vibrated a few seconds later, a short, powerful reply. What happened? Tasha bit her lip, typing slowly. The flight attendant forced me to leave my seat. Didn't believe my ticket was real. No one asked. No one helped. The moment she hit send, Tasha knew. The battlefield had been drawn. A wake-up call had been sounded, not through shouting, but through truth. And this flight was not going to take off as easily as they thought. The Boeing 737 remained motionless on the ground, its wheels resting silently as if sighing under the morning sun. The cabin, once filled with the lively sounds of conversations and rolling suitcases, had now faded into hushed, cautious whispers. Tasha sat curled up in her economy seat, her hands lightly gripping the straps of her backpack. The phone on her lap had gone dark, but Evelyn's last message still echoed in her mind, steady as a vow. Stay where you are. I'll handle it. It wasn't a comfort. It wasn't an empty reassurance. It was a command, gentle but heavy with meaning. Tasha knew. Things were just beginning. Meanwhile, at the front in the cockpit, another conversation was unfolding. Captain Monroe, a man who had flown through storms, handled mid-air emergencies, and faced the fiercest turbulence, had never felt so firmly grounded before. In his earpiece, a deep, cutting voice from an FAA representative sounded, Hold your taxi. Do not leave the gate. A complaint has been filed directly by Director Evelyn Brooks. Monroe frowned. That name was not to be trifled with. A request from her wasn't a negotiation, it was an order. He removed his headset, turning to his co-pilot. We're holding position, he said quietly. Moments later, the PA system crackled to life. Captain Monroe's voice, calm but heavy, filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a technical issue, we will remain at the gate for a short time. Thank you for your patience. Murmurs, sighs, and low complaints began rippling through the cabin, but Tasha simply closed her eyes, resting her forehead against the cool window. She knew this was only the beginning. At the front galley near first class, Ms. Parker sipped from a paper cup, her eyes nervously darting toward the cockpit door. Her palms were slick with sweat. Something was wrong. This wasn't like the quick handling of passengers she had done before. Louise, a young flight attendant, approached cautiously. About the girl earlier. Ms. Parker didn't bother looking up. I handled it. Louise pressed his lips together, uneasy. I saw her ticket. It was real. Ms. Parker smirked without warmth. Lots of things look real. Don't lecture me, Louise. The sharpness of her voice silenced him. He turned away, but a heaviness settled in his chest. He had seen it all. And he knew. A storm was coming, and this time it wasn't in the skies. It was right beneath their feet. Tasha didn't send another message. She simply waited. Her fingers still clutched the backpack straps, but her mind was strangely calm. No need to shout, no need to rebel. She had done the right thing. And now, the truth would speak for itself. Louder than any word she could have said. Above her, the cabin remained somber. Passengers began exchanging glances. Some whispered, some checked their watches and frowned. No one asked aloud, but the atmosphere was changing. The glances that once avoided her were now drawn to the small girl in economy, the one who had been dealt with. Minutes later, the cockpit phone rang. Captain Monroe picked up his ear, alert. Hold position. Airport security is en route. A passenger discrimination complaint has been filed. FAA requests full incident verification. Monroe slowly set down the handset. He had flown thousands of flights, faced engine fires, extreme weather, and even mid-air emergencies. But he had never encountered anything quite like this. Through the small cockpit window, he looked toward the cabin. At the empty seat 3B, a small girl sat silently at the back of the plane. Luis made another pass through the economy, his gaze sweeping over Tasha. This time, his look wasn't avoidance. It wasn't pity. It was acknowledgement. He dipped his head ever so slightly. Tasha met his gaze briefly, then turned back toward the window, holding on to her silence. Steady and firm like a declaration that needed no sound. Up front, Ms. Parker sensed something was wrong. She stiffened when she saw Captain Monroe step out of the cockpit, his gaze hard. "Ms. Parker," he said, not loudly, but with a weight that struck deep. "Please report to the cockpit." Conversations near the front of the plane abruptly died down. Passengers instinctively felt the tension thicken. Some stole curious glances as Ms. Parker, stiff and pale, made her way toward the cockpit. A cold shiver crawled up her spine. Inside the cockpit, Captain Monroe didn't mince words. "Did you ask Passenger Holloway to vacate her seat?" Ms. Parker nodded, her mouth dry. "Did you verify her ticket, or confirm with the ground staff first?" Silence. A heartbeat stretched unbearably long. "I looked at her ticket, and you judged based on her appearance," Captain Monroe finished, his voice slicing through the air like a knife through ice. A small click echoed from the intercom system. Their conversation was now officially being recorded at the FAA's request. Ms. Parker's chest tightened, as if invisible ropes were constricting her. "FAA requires you to apologize publicly to the passenger and restore her to her original seat. Immediately." Her face drained of color. Never before in her career had she been ordered like this, but she knew this wasn't just an internal airline issue anymore. This was federal. Back in the economy, Tasha saw the stiff silhouette of Ms. Parker walking down the aisle. Every gaze in the cabin turned toward them. Ms. Parker bent down stiffly in front of Tasha, her smile forced and strained. "Apologies for the misunderstanding. Please return to your first-class seat." Her voice cracked slightly at the end. Tasha looked at her for a long, steady moment. Not with anger, not with triumph, just with silence. A silence so profound it made the whole cabin hold its breath. Finally she stood, slung her backpack over her shoulder, and walked past Ms. Parker. Back to seat 3B. No cheers, no congratulations. But the cabin air had shifted. Permanently. An elderly passenger nodded slowly as Tasha passed. A young woman gripped the armrest, tears shining in her eyes. Tasha didn't need smiles. She didn't need apologies. She only needed to return to the seat where she had always belonged. As the small girl reclaimed seat 3B, the cabin sank into a heavy silence. Not the indifference of earlier, not the casual curiosity, but a dense, quiet recognition. An unspoken confession from everyone who had looked away. And up in the front galley, Ms. Parker leaned heavily against the wall, her hands trembling. For the first time in her life, she realized. One small wrong decision, one unconscious bias, one quick judgment based on appearances. It was enough to unravel everything she had spent years building. First-class cabin, silent as a grave. Tasha sat quietly in seat 3B, back straight, hands resting lightly in her lap, eyes gazing out the window. The sky beyond stretched in a vast, deceptive peace, bright, endless, serene. Inside the plane, however, the silence bore a crushing weight. No one spoke, no one smiled. The earlier whispers had died completely, replaced by avoiding glances, awkward coughs, and clumsy movements meant to mask shame. No one could pretend anymore that this was merely a technical delay. In the cockpit, Captain Monroe received the final notification from the FAA. Hold position at the gate. Inspectors are en route to the aircraft. Upon arrival, they will conduct direct interviews with the crew and involved flight attendants. The captain exhaled slowly and removed his headset. This was no longer just an internal airline issue. It had become a federal matter. He looked toward the cabin once again. Seat 3B was no longer empty. A small girl sat there, back straight as steel. In the forward galley, Ms. Parker slumped into a jump seat, her face pale as paper. She wrung her hands, icy and trembling. Every minute that passed felt like another blade slicing through the reputation and career she had spent a decade building. Luis stood quietly nearby, his expression conflicted. He wanted to say something, but held back. Not because he lacked compassion, but because he knew. Some mistakes couldn't be erased by a mere apology. A soft ding sounded. Passengers instinctively lifted their heads as the airplane door opened slightly. 2 FAA officers boarded, a sharp-faced woman in a dark uniform and a man in a dark suit with an official badge glinting on his chest. No smiles, no greetings. They moved swiftly, decisively toward the galley. The silence in the cabin tightened even further. An invisible noose drawn taut. Luis bent down and whispered to Ms. Parker, "They're here." Ms. Parker swallowed hard, her throat dry as sand. She stood, her legs so weak they nearly buckled beneath her. Around the cabin, passengers began murmuring again. But this time not from idle curiosity. They understood now, and they were ashamed. Not because they had actively done wrong, but because when the moment had come to stand up, they had chosen silence. Tasha remained still, a steadfast pillar amid the sea of unease. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply existed. Like an invisible sword plunged into the heart of falsehood, prejudice, and cowardice. A younger flight attendant approached her gently. "Ms. Holloway." Tasha looked up, her gaze calm. "We'll escort you off the plane after all other passengers have disembarked. Please wait just a little longer." Tasha nodded without complaint, her quiet composure. It echoed louder than any riot. In the galley, the FAA officers faced Ms. Parker. "Please come with us, immediately." She didn't resist. She didn't argue. She simply followed them, face bloodless and hollow. Luis watched her go, a heavy sadness settling over him. Today, he hadn't just witnessed the fall of a colleague. He had seen an entire hidden system, one that judged by appearance rather than truth, stripped bare under the harsh light of accountability. As Miss Parker was escorted off the plane, the cabin remained utterly still. No clapping, no booing, only a bone-deep silence, an unspoken indictment from everyone who had witnessed it all. An elderly woman in seat 2A dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. A businessman in 1D kept his head bowed, his glasses catching the faint light. Those who had once shot Tasha doubtful glances now couldn't lift their eyes. Tasha remained seated, gaze steady, heartbeat slow and strong. She didn't need anyone to defend her. She didn't need anyone to apologize. She had reclaimed her place by truth alone. Over the PA, Captain Monroe made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to unforeseen circumstances, this flight will not depart. We will assist you in deplaning shortly. Please remain seated until further instructions." A low wave of sighs rippled through the cabin, but no one complained loudly. They knew, And they understood why. Not because the plane was broken, not because of any mechanical failure, but because one girl, with quiet resilience and a simple text message, had forced an entire system to stop and reckon with itself. As passengers began to leave the plane, row by row, their gazes swept over Tasha. Full of guilt, respect, and reflection. No one dared to speak, no one apologized, but this silence. This time, it was a recognition. Tasha dipped her head slightly as if sending them an unspoken message. I was here. And this time, you had to see me. As she stepped down the boarding stairs, the soft morning light bathed her hair in a silent halo. Waiting for her at the end of the jetway was Evelyn, standing firm in her navy trench coat, her face serene, but her eyes were shining with open pride. No words were needed. Tasha walked forward, small but unbreakable, standing beside her godmother. They turned away from the airplane's quietly closing doors. Behind them an old world was cracking apart. Ahead, a fragile but real new future was beginning, built on truth, on a silence that could no longer be ignored, on one girl, one message, and a system forced, at last, to listen. The international airport buzzed with life, as always. Suitcases rolling across the polished stone floors, boarding announcements echoing overhead in a constant rhythm. But in a secluded corner on the east wing of the terminal, no one heard the hurried footsteps. No one noticed the stark white lights burning in a hastily assembled interrogation room. And in that cold room, Ms. Parker sat facing two FAA investigators. She sat hunched over, hands tightly intertwined atop the icy metal table. The flight attendant uniform she once wore with pride now felt unbearably heavy, like a false shell that had been stripped away. Before her lay an open file, the incident report, the list of witnesses, and photos of the passenger, and, sitting squarely on top, the undeniable first-class ticket bearing the name Tasha Holloway, and First Class, Seat 3B, printed in bold. One of the investigators spoke, voice calm but razor-sharp. We want to hear it directly from you, step by step. Tell us exactly what happened this morning. Ms. Parker swallowed dryly. She drew a deep breath, but it felt like a noose tightening around her throat. She began, her voice hoarse. I saw her sitting in 3B. I thought she didn't have a valid ticket. The investigator scribbled notes briskly. No interruptions. No comments. Based on what? A simple question. But it landed like a hammer blow. Ms. Parker bowed her head, the excuses clogging her throat. She couldn't say because she looked too young, or because she dressed simply, or because she was black. Even though the naked truth was exactly that, any word she uttered now would only deepen the wound. I misjudged, she finally whispered, barely audible. One of the investigators nodded slowly, unsurprised. Did you verify her ticket with the system before asking her to move? No. Did you confirm with ground staff? No. Each question drove another nail into the crumbling defense she tried to hold. No shields left, no excuses to cling to. Only the bare, brutal truth. Prejudice had decided for her. And now, that prejudice had brought down everything she once took pride in. Outside the interrogation room, the terminal continued its endless motion. Passengers hurried past, dragging their luggage, focused on their flights. No one noticed the small girl in a gray hoodie, backpack slung over one shoulder, sitting quietly by a window overlooking the tarmac. Tasha rested her forehead against the cold glass, watching planes lift off one after another into the brilliant blue sky. She wasn't angry. She wasn't triumphant. She simply felt. She felt a world slowly shifting, like a giant wheel being nudged, however slightly, off its rusted axis. Evelyn approached, 2 paper coffee cups in hand. She sat down beside Tasha, offering 1 cup. Tasha accepted it, her fingers trembling slightly from the chill, but her eyes remained steady. "You okay?" Evelyn asked, her voice warm and low. Tasha nodded softly. There was a strange peace surrounding her, the quiet acceptance that the fight for dignity often happens not through shouting, but through silent persistence. "She's being interrogated," Evelyn added, taking a sip of coffee, "and the airline is being forced to launch a full internal investigation today." Tasha said nothing. She didn't need the details. She had already done her part. The rest, she would leave the truth to walk on its own. At the airline's headquarters, not far from the airport, a crisis meeting was underway. Martin Raines, the CEO, slammed a thick file onto the conference table. His face was drawn taut with anger. A flight attendant kicked a 16-year-old girl out of her first-class seat without verifying the ticket. His voice echoed off the conference room walls. Around the table, legal advisors, HR directors, PR heads, everyone, sat pale and silent. The FAA's report had arrived, and it wasn't gentle. Attached was a warning. If the airline failed to act properly, its flight operating certificates could be reviewed. The crisis wasn't looming anymore. It was here. Thick, suffocating, unavoidable. On a corner screen, news had already begun to spread. A niche aviation blog broke the story. Flight 263 EFAA launches investigation into alleged racial discrimination of passenger. The headline blinked ominously, cutting into the airline's pride like a blade. And they knew. Within hours, the mainstream media would pick it up. There would be no hiding, no explaining it away, no half-hearted press releases to contain the damage. Back at the terminal, Tasha remained by the window. The warmth of the coffee in her hands had faded, but she didn't mind. Her eyes followed another plane slicing through the sky, leaving behind a long, thin trail, like a delicate seam stitching the earth to the heavens. Somewhere deep inside, she knew. She had sewn a tear closed, not just for herself, but for those who would come after, without riots, without shouting, just by standing her ground. Her phone buzzed in her hoodie pocket. Tasha checked it, a simple message. "Thank you," for refusing to stay silent. The sender, an old teacher from high school, the one who once told her, "Change doesn't come from crowds. It comes from those who stand alone among them and say, 'No.'" Tasha smiled softly. No one had prepared her for this lesson. No textbook had taught her how to face it, but she had done it, and that, by itself, was a victory. Back inside the interrogation room, Ms. Parker slumped over the metal table, defeated. The FAA officers continued, their voices crisp, their words as sharp as knives. "Have you handled other passengers based solely on a feeling before? Are you aware that your actions violated federal civil rights? Did you realize that the girl had never caused a disturbance, never raised her voice, and was simply sitting in her assigned seat?" Each question hammered another nail into the coffin of her career. And when the interrogation ended, Ms. Parker understood fully. It was over. Not just her job, but the naive belief she once carried, that snap judgments based on fleeting impressions were harmless. They had never been harmless. They could destroy a person, and this time the price was her own. Outside, the world kept spinning, but something subtle yet undeniable had shifted. A silent message had been sent. Look carefully before you judge. Ask before you assume. And remember, silence in the face of injustice is itself an act. The next morning, golden sunlight bathed the city, but inside the main headquarters of Skyreach Airlines, no one felt its warmth. The vast conference room sat under a heavy cloud of tension. Everyone gathered in a circle, the CEO, the head of human resources, the crisis communications director, and the legal counsel. On the large wall-mounted screen, news headlines flashed relentlessly. FAA investigates serious discrimination allegations on Flight 263. Skyreach Airlines faces media firestorm over first-class passenger incident. A 16-year-old girl's silent stand shakes the aviation industry. The headlines spun in an endless loop, piercing the fragile pride of those who once thought they had control over everything. Martin Raines, the CEO, tapped his pen lightly against the glass table. "We're no longer dealing with an internal issue," he said, his voice hoarse from a sleepless night. "The FAA is involved. The public knows. If we don't act immediately, we'll lose more than a single flight attendant." He scanned the room. "We'll lose trust. We'll lose passengers. And if things get worse, we might lose the right to operate certain international routes." The room fell into heavy silence. Everyone understood. This was no longer something that could be buried with a hollow press release. This was a defining crisis. One of the legal advisors cleared their throat. "We recommend the immediate suspension of Ms. Parker. A full, deep internal investigation must be launched, and a mandatory overhaul of anti-discrimination training is implemented across all levels." The head of crisis communications added, "We need to announce new policies. We must show the world that Skyreach is committed to real change, not just reacting to save face." Martin nodded slowly. "Start today, and be prepared. This is only the beginning." Meanwhile, in a small hotel room near the airport, Tasha sat curled up on a sofa, laptop on her knees, slowly scrolling through the news. She hadn't searched for her name, but it was everywhere. The first post she saw was simply a photograph. The girl in the gray hoodie, stepping silently off the plane, eyes set forward. No caption, no hashtags. The silence in the image, louder than 1,000 words. The news continued to spread rapidly. A major national television network broadcast the story in its morning news segment, headlined, "Flight Grounded Midway. A Young Girl and the Power of Truth." They interviewed passengers from the flight. A middle-aged man, looking visibly uncomfortable, confessed to the camera, "I saw it happen. I stayed silent. I didn't know what to do. And now I feel ashamed." An elderly woman choked up, "I thought." Maybe she was in the wrong seat. "I thought that, without even checking. I was wrong." For the first time, Tasha realized, silence too could become an apology, if it came from a place of honest reckoning. Evelyn entered the room carrying 2 cups of hot tea. She set one in front of Tasha and sat down beside her. "You don't have to read it all," she said gently. "You've already done what you needed to do." Tasha pressed her lips together, eyes still fixed on the screen. "I just want to know if anything will change." Evelyn looked at her, her gaze deep and steady. "You made a system stop. You made it look at itself. You made it listen. That's a beginning. And sometimes beginnings are the hardest part." Tasha gripped the warm cup, letting the heat seep into her hands, easing the cold that had lodged in her heart since yesterday. Back at Skyreach headquarters, an emergency press conference was hastily assembled. On the podium, CEO Martin Raines stepped up, his face grave. Before dozens of cameras and hundreds of scrutinizing eyes, he declared, "We take full responsibility for what occurred on Flight 263. A young passenger was treated unfairly. That stands against everything Skyreach claims to uphold. Effective immediately, we have suspended the staff involved, are fully cooperating with the FAA, and commit to sweeping reforms to ensure this never happens again." He bowed his head, not perfunctorily, but sincerely. The room fell silent. This time people didn't just hear words. They felt the weight behind them. At the same time, new internal policies were rolled out. Mandatory unconscious bias training for all employees, from flight attendants to senior executives. A two-step verification process for ticket and passenger seating to prevent assumption-based judgments. An anonymous feedback system for passengers to report any discriminatory behavior. A quiet, deep restructuring. Tasha didn't know all of this immediately, but somewhere deep inside she could feel something had shifted. That evening, Tasha and Evelyn walked along the riverside near the hotel. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh grass and the soft lapping of water against stones. Tasha walked slowly, hands tucked into the pockets of her hoodie. "I don't think I'll ever be normal again," she murmured. Evelyn chuckled softly. "You haven't been normal for a long time, Tasha. Normal doesn't change the world. Normal doesn't stop a plane. Normal doesn't make people look at themselves." Tasha looked at her, a flicker of light in her eyes. "I just wanted to sit quietly in my seat," she said. Evelyn nodded, her face tender. "And that's exactly why you're extraordinary." They continued walking in silence. Their slow, steady footsteps write a new story upon the still rough ground of the world. A story that didn't begin with shouting, nor with slogans, but with a small girl, a rightful seat, and an unyielding quiet strength. 7 a.m. The sunlight spilled like silk across the slowly waking streets. Inside a small hotel room, Tasha sat at the table, a laptop open in front of her, a cup of warm cocoa by her side. She no longer searched for her name. Her name now appeared across every major news outlet, even though she had never spoken a single word to the press. The power of silence, 16-year-old girl forces an entire system to change. New York Times. Not a shout, but steadfastness. The story of Tasha Holloway. Washington Post. One girl, one plane ticket, one truth too loud to ignore. BBC. Each headline flashed across the screen like crashing waves, but Tasha simply read them silently. She didn't need fame. She only needed to know. The truth had been heard. Her inbox overflowed with messages. A teacher from Minnesota thanked her for providing a living example of quiet resilience to her students. A single mother from Atlanta shares how Tasha's story gave her daughter the confidence to walk into her first classroom without fear. A former flight attendant admitted he once stayed silent in the face of injustice and had regretted it all her life. Those words, unadorned, unpretentious, settled softly in Tasha's heart, likewise quietly easing the unseen bruises within her. At the FAA headquarters, the official press conference began. A woman stood at the podium dressed in a dark blue suit, name tag pinned to her chest, Evelyn Brooks. Her face betrayed no excess emotion. Only the gravity of someone who understood that what she was about to announce would redraw the line between responsibility and negligence in the aviation industry. Evelyn opened the folder before her, her voice steady and firm. After a comprehensive investigation into SkyReach Airlines Flight 263, we have determined that an incident of unjustifiable discrimination occurred against a minor passenger with a valid first-class ticket. This conduct constitutes a serious violation of civil rights regulations in air travel. Cameras flashed. Reporters furiously tapped at their keyboards. Evelyn continued. We are mandating that SkyReach Airlines implement the following corrective measures. Permanent termination of the employee involved. Mandatory anti-bias training for all staff. Updated ticket verification and passenger treatment protocols. Establishment of an independent third-party feedback system. Her voice didn't waver. She didn't need anger to give her words weight. The truth itself was heavy enough. Finally, Evelyn lifted her gaze to the cameras. Change does not come from apologies. It comes from action. In her hotel room, Tasha sat upright, eyes fixed on the screen, absorbing every word. Not because she needed validation, but because each decision announced was proof that her silent stand that day had not been meaningless. The following day, Skyreach Airlines officially announced a series of internal reforms. Quarterly mandatory anti-discrimination training sessions. Immediate implementation of an anonymous passenger grievance system. Requirement that all lead flight attendants and pilots complete intensive bias awareness programs before resuming duty. The airline's internal structure was shaken. Many grumbled, some left. But the wheel had been set in motion, and it could not turn back. Tasha knew little of the emergency meetings. She paid no mind to the angry posts, the heated debates flooding social media. She only knew one thing. When she had sat quietly in her seat that day, when she hadn't screamed, hadn't begged, hadn't cried, she had pushed the world off its well-worn tracks, not with noise, not with rage, but with unwavering conviction and a silent belief that she deserved to be treated fairly. That evening, Evelyn took Tasha to a small coffee shop tucked into a street corner. No reporters, no flashing cameras, just two women, one young, one older, sitting by the window, watching the streetlights shimmer against the rain-slick sidewalks. "She's been dismissed," Evelyn said quietly. Tasha didn't ask who. She knew. Ms. Parker. A part of her felt relieved. Another part weighed heavily. Not out of hatred, but sadness. Sadness for someone who had allowed prejudice to overshadow her humanity. After a while, Tasha asked softly, "Do you think they'll change?" Evelyn placed her hand gently on the table and answered slowly, "No one changes overnight, Tasha. But those who once stayed silent, they are beginning to listen, and those who once closed their eyes, they are now forced to see." "That's enough then," Tasha whispered. Evelyn smiled. "Enough so you no longer have to lower your head when you board a plane. Enough so that someday other children won't have to wonder if they truly belong in the seat they paid for." Tasha gazed out the window. Night had fallen, but the lights from the city, the street lamps, the neon signs, persisted, slicing through the darkness. Just like her, not with slogans, not with noise, but by existing, steadfast, unbending. Elsewhere in the city, inside a law office, Ms. Parker sat motionless, staring at the termination notice before her. Everything ended, not with scandalous headlines, but with a cold, searing silence. The same silence she had used that day to judge a girl without asking a single question. Silence, too, could be a verdict. Weeks later, in a small high school in Atlanta, a teacher pinned up a black and white photo on the classroom wall. A young black girl in a hoodie stepping off a plane, head held high, calm as the sea after a storm. Beneath it, bold words read, "She didn't need to scream to be heard. She only needed the truth." 3 weeks after the Flight 263 incident, the world gradually returned to its usual rhythm. Flights taking off and landing nonstop, hurried crowds bustling through packed terminals, airport announcements echoing down endless hallways. But beneath the surface, something had changed. Not loudly, not abruptly, just a quiet shift, rippling outward like small waves that would never truly fade. One afternoon, Tasha received a handwritten letter. Not an email, not a text message, but an actual envelope, scrawled with clumsy yet heartfelt handwriting. "You don't know me, Tasha, but I am the principal of a high school in Missouri. Today I shared your story with 400 students, not to make them pity you, but to help them understand silence can be an action too. And courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's simple, choosing not to leave your seat. Thank you for teaching us that." Tasha sat on the edge of her bed, reading the letter over and over again. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from realizing something she had never dared to think before. She had touched the world, not with a scream, but with a slow, steady heartbeat. Her story found its way into school curricula at several high schools. In civics classes, teachers displayed the photo of Tasha sitting calmly in the airplane cabin, her hands gently clutching her backpack, her gaze steady. Students discussed what is stronger, silence or loud protest. They wrote essays asking themselves, if I had been on that flight, what would I have done? No one needed to know Tasha in her everyday life. No one needed her to make grand speeches. They only needed to see a small girl, without banners, without podiums, who, by simply existing with unshakable conviction, had made the world listen. Meanwhile, Evelyn received invitations from international aviation organizations to speak about the Flight 263 case. But she declined most of them. She understood. This was not a story to be exploited. It was a reminder, a lesson that those who truly listened would know how to carry forward. One weekend evening, Tasha and Evelyn sat in the small garden behind their hotel. A paper lantern hanging from a tree cast a soft golden glow over their quiet faces. Tasha held a printed photo in her hands, her image seated on the plane, her eyes unyielding even as she was forced from her seat. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered, I still remember how it felt that day. Like the whole world had turned its back, like I was completely alone. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She simply let the words drift with the breeze. After a while, she said, as if recounting something self-evident, But you didn't abandon yourself. Tasha turned to her. And that's something, no, not even the most powerful can ever take away. The lantern swayed gently in the breeze, its flickering light reflected in the tears shimmering in Tasha's eyes. The next day, when Tasha walked into a small cafe to buy a drink, she was greeted by a genuine smile from a server. Not a forced grin, not a judgmental glance, but a true, welcoming smile. Not because they knew who she was, but because they had learned, never judge someone by appearances. The emails kept coming. A young flight attendant wrote that she had attended a training session on unconscious bias, and for the first time realized that she had once unknowingly hurt someone. A law student promised to pursue passenger rights law not just on paper, but through real action on every flight. A mother from San Diego shared how her 8-year-old daughter now confidently declared in class, "Everyone deserves to sit where they belong, no matter what they look like." Tasha didn't reply to all of them. She didn't need to. Change had begun, not through viral headlines, but through small, genuine acts by thousands of strangers. Seeds quietly sprouting from one seemingly fragile moment. A girl who refused to leave her rightful seat. One evening, as Evelyn took her to the airport for her flight home, they passed by a newly erected billboard in the main terminal, an image of an airplane cabin row. Above it, a simple inscription, "A valid ticket needs no justification. A human being needs no proof of worth." Tasha paused before the sign, her heart swelling with a strange emotion, not pride, not triumph, but a profound sense of relief. As if, finally, the world had begun to understand. Seated on her return flight, Tasha gazed out the window. The plane glided across the tarmac, gathering speed, before lifting into the sky, slicing through thin, misty clouds. The sky opened up vast and clear, and for the first time after everything, she allowed herself to fully relax, no longer worried about being questioned, no longer feeling the need to prove she belonged. She was simply flying, and for her, that was the greatest victory. Below the cloud layers, the small city faded into the distance. But in her heart, Tasha knew. The silence she had carried that day had left an indelible mark. Not in paperwork, not in fleeting news cycles, but in the very way the world, though slow, though clumsy, I was learning to truly see. Just 1 week after her return flight home, Tasha's email inbox overflowed with invitations. A prestigious university invited her to be a guest speaker at their commencement ceremony. A civil rights organization asked her to join a campaign to raise public awareness. Major television networks requested live interviews, even promising editorial control assurances. Invitation after invitation poured in. It was as if the whole world was opening its doors to Tasha. But instead of excitement, she only felt overwhelmed. And a small, quiet voice inside her, the deepest part of her, whispered, "Are they truly listening to me because I stayed silent, or do they just need a symbol?" One afternoon, Tasha sat on the wooden steps of her porch, watching maple leaves tumble down onto the sidewalk. Evelyn stepped outside, 2 mugs of hot cocoa in her hands. She handed one to Tasha, then sat down beside her. No questions. She already knew. Tasha sipped quietly, then exhaled. "I'm not sure I want to become someone in the eyes of everyone else." Evelyn stayed silent, listening. Tasha went on. I just want to live quietly, to simply be myself, not the girl from the flight, not the symbol of silence." Her voice faded into a whisper. Evelyn placed her warm hand over Tasha's. "You owe the world nothing, Tasha. No one has the right to demand you become a symbol for anything. You did what needed to be done, when it needed to be done, and that is enough." Tasha turned to look at her. In Evelyn's eyes there was no expectation, only deep understanding. "If you choose to keep speaking," Evelyn smiled gently, "then speak in your voice. And if you choose silence, that is your right too. Your courage isn't measured by whether you speak out. It lies in how faithfully you listen to your own heart." The words fell softly, like an early spring rain. Tasha nodded, her eyes glistening with gratitude. A few days later, Tasha agreed to a small speaking event at a local community center. No flashing cameras, no live TV broadcasts, just a cozy room, about 40 people seated in a circle, most of them high school students. Tasha entered wearing a simple sweater, jeans, and sneakers. No podium, no prepared speech, just herself, real, present, and her story. A petite girl raised her hand first, her voice trembling. "Were you ever scared when everyone was looking at you?" Tasha smiled gently, not a theatrical smile, a genuine one. "Of course, I was terrified, terrified of being misunderstood, terrified of being forgotten, terrified that I was too small to change anything." She paused, sweeping her gaze across the room. "But then I realized even though I was scared, I stayed seated. Even though my heart pounded in my chest, I kept my ticket in hand. Even though no one else stood up, I chose not to walk away. Sometimes courage isn't the absence of fear. It's feeling the fear and staying anyway." The room fell into profound silence, not forced, but heavy with truth. From the back of the room, a curly-haired boy raised his hand next. "Were you angry? Angry at the people who didn't stand up for you?" Tasha thought for a moment before answering, her voice steady. "Maybe at first, yes. But eventually I understood. Sometimes people stay silent not because they agree with what's wrong, but because they're scared too. Just like I was." She lifted her head, her gaze carrying a rare maturity for someone only 16. "The important thing isn't blaming those who stayed silent. It's deciding, when it's my turn, will I choose silence or will I choose to speak?" A soft sniffle broke the stillness somewhere in the circle. No one laughed, no one mocked, only a profound silence. this time born from deep understanding. After the sharing session, several students came up, not to ask for autographs, not for selfies, but simply to say, "Thank you for showing me that silence can be powerful. I'll remember today when I face injustice someday. I never realized an ordinary person could change something too." Tasha nodded and accepted each word with humility. No craving for attention, no hunger for fame. Just one simple wish. If one person can change one small thing, then the world will change too. That night back at home, Tasha opened her laptop and calmly typed an email. "Dear ABC event organizers, thank you for inviting me to speak at your upcoming program. However, I must respectfully decline. I believe stories like mine should not be inflated into grand speeches. They should remain true to their real size, a small moment, a small choice, an undeniable truth. Wishing you a successful event. Warm regards, Tasha Holloway." She reread it once, then hit send, and when the screen flashed "message sent successfully," Tasha leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks I felt a deep, unwavering peace. No more pressure to become a symbol. No more fear of being swept away by the whirlwind of expectations. Only herself, a small girl, who had dared to stay seated when the world around her shook. And in doing so, she had changed everything, by listening to the quiet, steadfast voice within her. On a chilly autumn morning, just as Tasha sat down for breakfast, her phone started buzzing nonstop. It wasn't an alarm for a class. It wasn't a reminder for an appointment. It was another storm, a media storm, gathering speed. Another flight, another airline, another black passenger, this time an elderly woman, was asked to vacate her business class seat despite holding a valid ticket. Once again, baseless suspicion. Once again, judgmental glances without evidence. Across the news, on social media, even from public figures, the same name resurfaced: Tasha Holloway. The girl who changed the airline industry. Will she speak out again? "Tasha, we need you. This is your moment to lead." Notifications flooded her screen. Emails poured in by the minute. A silent, invisible pressure descended, heavy and relentless. Evelyn stepped into the room, spotting Tasha sitting frozen, staring blankly at her phone. She said nothing. She simply poured a cup of warm tea and set it down beside her. After a long while, Tasha whispered, "They want me to do something. To stand up, to speak loudly, to lead." She gripped the cup tightly, the rising steam blurring her tense knuckles. She swallowed hard, her voice cracking. "I'm not sure that's the right way." Evelyn sat across from her, her gaze steady and patient. "You can speak if you want to," she said gently, "and you can choose silence if that's what your heart tells you." Tasha looked up, her eyes full of confusion. "But if I don't do anything, people will be disappointed. They'll think I'm a coward. They'll say I only wanted fame before, and now I'm hiding." Evelyn sighed, resting her hand firmly over Tasha's. "You are not living this life to be anyone's hero. You did something extraordinary by staying true to yourself. Don't let the world drag you away from that truth. Act not because of expectation. Act because of conscience." Tasha remained sitting long after Evelyn left. In her mind, a whirlwind of images spun. Hashtags demanding she speak up. Articles praising her as a guiding beacon. Comments criticizing her silence. The weight of it all pressed down like invisible chains. And yet, deep inside her, a small flame still burned. Not a blazing fire, not a roaring inferno. Just a quiet, steady flicker. But precisely because of that, it could not be extinguished easily. That night, Tasha opened her laptop. She didn't scroll through social media. She didn't answer interview requests. She didn't chase the noise. Instead, she opened a blank document, and she began to write. just for herself. I am not a symbol. I am not a hero. I am a human being with fear, with hope, and with choice. I believe in action, but I also believe in discernment. I will not act because I am pushed forward. I will not stay silent because I am pulled back. I will move when I believe it is necessary, not a moment earlier, not a moment later. And when I act, it will be from truth, not from noise. She reread those words once, twice. Each sentence felt like a stake hammered into the ground beneath her, anchoring her against the storm of expectations. The next day, as television networks continued to call her name, articles kept assigning her roles she never asked for. Tasha remained silent, not out of fear, not out of avoidance, but because she understood silence, when chosen with clarity and heart, is also an act. And this time, she chose to wait until she was certain that if she spoke, her voice would not serve anyone's expectations, but only what was truly right. A week later, Tasha sent an open letter to a small local newspaper. No PR campaign, no trending hashtags, just a short, simple piece. I know many expect me to act, but change does not always come through loud leadership. Sometimes change begins when each of us asks ourselves, if I were there, what would I have done? If this injustice moves your heart, let your actions speak for themselves, not your expectations of others. We do not need a hero. We need a community of people willing not to look away. I have done my part. Now it's your turn. No hashtags, no movement building, just a quiet, powerful reminder. Just like she once did on Flight 263, sitting still, clutching her ticket, refusing to be erased. And with that same quiet steadfastness, Tasha changed a system. Today she did the same once more. No shouting, no parading onto the stage, just tending to the small flame within her, and letting that quiet light slowly and patiently reach those ready to change. 3 years had passed. The world kept spinning. Planes still took off and landed every day, as if that fateful morning when a quiet girl had silently forced an entire system to reckon with itself had never happened. But if you listened closely, you would realize something had changed. Not through earth-shattering revolutions, not through thundering slogans, but through quiet, persistent shifts, like a river slowly, relentlessly wearing away the hardest stone. Tasha was now a sophomore, majoring in social sciences at a small, vibrant university. She lived in a modest apartment near the park, where she tended to little clusters of white daisies outside her window. Each morning she biked to class, her backpack slung casually over one shoulder, soft jazz melodies humming through her earbuds. She was no longer the girl from Flight 263 in her own eyes. She was simply Tasha Holloway, a girl living her life with all the peace she had once claimed through quiet defiance. Occasionally, in lectures about human rights or personal courage, professors would bring up the story of a young girl from years ago. Some freshmen would whisper, "Did you know?" Once, just by refusing to leave the seat she had paid for, a girl forced the entire airline industry to change. Some would glance around, wondering where that girl might be now. Some would quietly admire her. But whenever Tasha overheard these stories, she would only smile softly. No need to step forward. No need to claim recognition. No applause necessary. Because she knew. When you do the right thing, the greatest reward is not fame. It's the peace you feel when you look yourself in the mirror. One crisp autumn afternoon, Tasha sat by the lakeside on campus. The wind stirred ripples across the water, carrying yellow leaves in slow, lazy spirals. Beside her was a notebook, not for planning any grand speeches, just filled with scraps of thoughts, small dreams. Lessons she wanted to remember, gentle reminders to herself. In one corner of the notebook she had written, Never let the world decide when you must speak. Never let your silence be mistaken for complicity. Just remember, whether you choose to act or to be still, let it be your own choice, not a reaction to someone else's expectations. Tasha closed the notebook, letting the breeze carry a few fallen leaves across its pages. A soft smile touched her lips. That night, as the world outside buzzed with new headlines, fresh controversies, and ever-changing faces, Tasha lay under her warm blanket, eyes tracing patterns across the ceiling. She no longer felt the need to prove who she was, no need to chase after anyone's approval. She only needed to live, and when necessary, stand. Just as she had once done, just as she always would. Meanwhile, in the broader world, changes continued quietly. Some airlines revised their training programs. Flight attendants were now rigorously trained to recognize and dismantle unconscious biases. Fairer protocols for verifying passenger tickets were implemented. Every April, some airports hold internal forums, recalling the lesson of Flight 263 as a solemn reminder that a single wrong decision could steer an entire system astray. No one shouted Tasha's name anymore. No more sensational headlines. No more viral hashtags. Only quiet, enduring changes, seeded by one unyielding moment of quiet defiance. And so, she had won. A victory with no golden trophy, no grand speeches, no glittering ceremonies, only a profound freedom within her heart. One day, while passing through an airport on her way home, Tasha witnessed a simple scene that made her chest tighten with emotion. A young black girl, perhaps 10 years old, was clutching her ticket nervously, trying to find her seat in the business class section. A flight attendant approached. No judgment, no suspicion, just a warm, genuine smile. "Let me help you find your seat, little princess." The girl beamed, nodding enthusiastically, and quickly settled into the wide leather seat. No raised eyebrows, no murmured whispers. Only the pure, ringing sound of a child's laughter filled the cabin. Tasha stood at a distance. No one recognized her. She tightened her grip on her backpack, her eyes shimmering with quiet pride. That was her true reward. Not because they knew her, but because they had changed, because of what she had once quietly sown. As the plane glided smoothly down the runway, Tasha leaned against the window, watching the sky stretch open before her. Just like that very first flight alone at 16. Just like the first time, she believed that sometimes just sitting firmly in your rightful seat was enough to light a lamp in the dark. No need for battle cries, no need for banners, only a silent faith. I deserve to be here. I deserve to be respected. And that, even if small, was enough to slowly, surely, change the world. The plane lifted into the air, carrying with it the girl who had once sat trembling but unyielding, and now, free of burdens, free of fear. Tasha Holloway soared upward, not asking for permission, not needing to prove anything, simply flying, because the sky from the beginning had always belonged to her. Closing message of the story. Respect is not a privilege reserved for a select few. It is the inherent right of every human being, requiring no judgment, no conditions. We live in a world where old prejudices still lurk, where appearances are judged before a single word is spoken, where silence, if not strong enough, can easily turn into complicity. But within the same world, sometimes a single, seemingly insignificant person, simply by refusing to abandon their rightful seat, simply by holding steadfast without shouting, can shake an entire system, can rattle the deepest-rooted norms. No titles needed, no spotlight required, no need to be etched into history books. All it takes is the courage to stand firm, when surrendering would have been so much easier. Tasha Holloway did not win through noise. She won through unwavering silence, through the quiet, resolute belief that she deserved respect as much as anyone else. And from that silence the world was forced, finally, to listen. Real-life lesson for us all. Every day we are given countless small choices. Choose to look deeper into the person rather than skimming their appearance. Choose to listen carefully before rushing to judgment. Choose to stand firm in our values even when no one else stands beside us. Change does not begin with grand gestures. It begins with how we treat the person right next to us, with kindness and unconditional respect. You do not need to scream to be heard. Sometimes all you need is to hold your ground, and the world in time will fall silent and change. If this story touched you, we invite you to leave a comment, share it with your loved ones, and follow our channel to discover more beautiful stories like this one. Thank you for journeying with us. We look forward to seeing you on future flights. Kindness is always the most steadfast ticket. Closing message of the story. Respect is not a privilege reserved for a select few. It is the inherent right of every human being, requiring no judgment, no conditions. We live in a world where old prejudices still lurk, where appearances are judged before a single word is spoken, where silence, if not strong enough, can easily turn into complicity. But within this same world, sometimes a single seemingly insignificant person, simply by refusing to abandon their rightful seat, simply by holding steadfast without shouting, can shake an entire system, can rattle the deepest-rooted norms. No titles needed, no spotlight required, no need to be etched into history books. All it takes is the courage to stand firm, when surrendering would have been so much easier. Tasha Holloway did not win through noise. She won through unwavering silence, through the quiet, resolute belief that she deserved respect as much as anyone else. And from that silence, the world was forced, finally, to listen. Real-life lesson for us all. Every day we are given countless small choices. Choose to look deeper into the person rather than skimming their appearance. Choose to listen carefully before rushing to judgment. Choose to stand firm in our values even when no one else stands beside us. Change does not begin with grand gestures. It begins with how we treat the person right next to us, with kindness and unconditional respect. You do not need to scream to be heard. Sometimes all you need is to hold your ground, and the world in time will fall silent and change. If this story touched you, we invite you to leave a comment, share it with your loved ones, and follow our channel to discover more beautiful stories like this one. Thank you for journeying with us. We look forward to seeing you on future flights, where kindness is always the most steadfast ticket.